let me know when we're going to do it. We're live? Sweet. This seems to happen to me every single time. I'm never ready for you guys, ever. But happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome back to NonSequitur. If you're joining us on the heels of last night, I hope that you are either heavily medicated or heavily intoxicated, as you needed to be for that discussion. But it's turning out to be quite the polarizing event, Steve. Have you noticed that we're getting infiltrated by flat earthers now with all kind of...
They found us. Once they found you, you get infiltrated.
Yeah. So we are going to kind of shift things from flat Earth into something that's it's a lot more serious, and something that I think that strikes at the heart of everyone, especially here in America, with the recent mass shootings and the uproar in students that are filing out to the streets and protesting not anymore. So we're going to have the gun debate tonight in a very civil manner. Of course, to represent the civility on the Christian side, we always bring SJ with us. Hello, SJ. Welcome back.
Hi there. Thanks, Kyle.
And then we have new to the show, RM Huffman. Hello, RM.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to just run through a couple quick announcements real quick, and then I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. So tomorrow, Friday the 13th at 8 o'clock, be here for the Kent Hovind roast. We have had a tremendous kind of collaboration, I guess you'd call it, with a bunch of YouTube creators. They've made fantastic videos. It's going to be excellent, so you don't want to miss that. Saturday, I don't know if you remember from last week, we had Dr. Stephen DiMattei here to talk about the Genesis story as it was written. He had a bad connection, so that we had to reschedule. So he'll be back Saturday at 8 o'clock. And then on Monday, if you are a gamer, we're going to try to do something with the gaming community, and we have a really special guest coming, and that is Rags. Very well. Steve actually has gotten
really
Rags.
Nice guy.
Shirt. Yeah. So
really nice
that's really
guy.
cool.
Cool gamer.
But yeah, we've got 4 more days with us straight back to back. So and then real quick, next Wednesday at 8 o'clock, we have Holy Kool-Aid, and SJ Craig is going to come and have a discussion with Holy Kool-Aid.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, so that will be a good time. So let's dive right in. I'm gonna let you guys take a second to introduce yourself for people who may be tuning in for the first time, or as RM is new, that'll be a good time for him to introduce himself. And we'll start with SJ, if you'll just kind of refresh everybody's memory, since you're on here so often.
Yes, I want to thank you for bringing me on, and I really appreciate it because I enjoy your show, and I enjoy the way that you and Steve have interacted with your guests. You're very polite. You were very polite last night with the flat Earth guy, and I found that very interesting. And Aaron Ra, that was always interesting. But I'm S.J. Thomason. I live in the United States. I live in Florida, about 3 hours away from Parkland, where they just had that mass shooting. So that's why this is something that is a topic that I very much want to discuss. I'm a university professor, and I teach business courses.
Excellent. RM?
Hey, RM Huffman. SJ invited me on here because we share a worldview, but very different stance on this particular issue. Now, I'm an anesthesiologist, so talking to people who are awake isn't really my thing. Hard to get folks to the computer, so here I am. I'm doing my best. Got 4 kids, live in Texas, so our houses are made of guns. Issue that's very, not really made of guns. I don't know if you'll know anything about Texas. We buy a lot. Anesthesiologist, published author, concept artist, do anagrams, active on the trash fire game war that is Twitter. But happy to be here. Hopefully, I can kind of give a viewpoint that maybe gives y'all some food for thought on this issue. And I think what's cool about this issue is it doesn't have to necessarily be so much of a fight, because I think we all are going to end up wanting the same thing, right? And we're just approaching it from different things. But the sides that we're arguing are trying to aim for the same result. So I'm interested to see how this will go.
Excellent. Real quick, where can people go to? Like you said, you're a published author. Where can people go to kind of look at your work, get copies?
Just Amazon, Amazon's everything. If you just search for R.M. Huffman, it'll bring up a couple of novels and then some short stories.
Excellent.
But
welcome to you both. I guess let's start very basic. I'm going to assume that we know, RM, you're taking the position that let's call it pro-gun, less control, correct?
Yeah, we can call it that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So, SJ, let's go over to you and kind of explain what your position on guns should be at this point. Like, if you could write legislation, how would you kind of push that narrative forward?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm kind of the opposite as far as guns. I don't like guns. I've never even handled a gun. I don't want guns in my house. My husband happens to be a Republican, and he likes the idea of guns, so that's where we differ. But as far as my own opinion, I've kind of been against guns. However, I understand that we do have a right here in the United States to have guns. Apparently, there are more guns than there are people here in the United States, if I'm not incorrect about that. I'd like to take the position that Japan has in guns, and actually I studied different positions, and I looked at Japan, and Japan's kind of interesting. So people, if they want to obtain a gun in Japan, and they have 127 million people there, and they have less than 10 deaths per year by guns. So that's a pretty neat fact. You have to go to an all-day class. You have to pass a written test. You have to pass a test every 3 years. You have to achieve a 95% accuracy during a shooting range test in Japan. The government checks into your criminal records. They interview your family, your friends. They want to make sure that you're mentally stable. And they can only buy shotguns and air rifles. You can't buy handguns in Japan. And so I think I'm taking a very strict approach. I think Japan has it pretty good, and I'm sure they don't have the mass shootings in the schools and the churches and all these other places. So that's my opinion.
Now, RM, from the points that she just talked about, any of those that you take issue with right offhand that you would say absolutely not here in America?
Well, hey, this is Cole. He said he should.
Hey, buddy.
Hey.
Talking about guns. So I guess let's start there. Actually, that's totally correct. If you look at about Japan, if we were going to pick one country to emulate as far as this, Japan would be at extremely low firearm death rate, extremely low firearm ownership rate. If you look at a chart that compares those two things across nations, the one huge outlier is the United States. And I'll find some of this stuff. Thanks, buddy. I'll find some of this stuff. I can tweet it out afterwards. But what it shows is Japan, by far the best. Low firearm ownership, low homicide rate. And that goes up. And about 10 nations down the line, there's the United States. Relatively small firearm murder rate. Gun ownership is through the roof, absolutely through the roof. You continue on, and eventually you get to the end, and you have a lot of nations in kind of sub-Saharan Africa, Central and South America, relatively low gun ownership rate, very, very high murder rate. So, in a perfect world, if we were building from the ground up, let's emulate Japan. And I'll even go further than that, SJ. And this is something that I think you and I can both agree on. Now, again, we share a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, and I think it's kind of important to establish that we're both coming from that worldview, which says before sin there was no death at all, animal death, any death. Sin is what brought in death, and from there people have killed each other.
I'm sorry. You're such a
You're like super dad.
Hilarious.
Your focus is like laser point.
Yeah, but it's just such a critical topic, and yet I can't help but be entertained because this was funny.
He's a funny guy.
He's cute. Very cute.
Very. Your focus is intense when getting your head shaken.
And we look forward to the time when there's not going to be any need for weapons, right? You look in Micah, and in Micah 4 it talks about, hey buddy, it talks about there's not going to be any need for a sword. It's a familiar verse. You're going to hammer swords into plowshares because a nation won't war against nation. You look at Isaiah, and there's not going to be any more violence whatsoever. The lion will lie down with the lamb. So the wolf will lie down with the lamb. Lion will eat straw with an ox. Look to Revelation, same sort of thing. That said, right now nations do war against nation, big time. I don't think it's a biblical position to say that God prefers violence at all. That said, you look in Luke 22, where he straight up tells his disciples, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Not necessarily the topic, but what I want to establish is I think Scripture is generally agnostic. It's kind of an amoral issue whether or not to have a gun. Although I think the ideal state, which we don't live in right now, is, no one's armed. No one's armed at all because there's no need for it. There's no violence. If we're building a nation, let's do it like Japan. Let's create a culture like Japan. And obviously there's a lot of history there, and a lot of it comes from 1945, and that kind of changed them from a very warrior culture to a very pacifist culture, and it's fantastic. But we're talking about gun control in America. So we have to deal with two realities. We can't make it Japan, and we have some constitutional boundaries that we gotta deal with realistically. And those are real concerns. So again, we're aiming for the same thing here, because these events are horrible. There's no one who says they're not horrible. They're absolutely terrible. So are the instances in Nice or Westminster or New York where people rent trucks and they run through pedestrians. They can kill 80-something. I'm a doctor. I've seen people shot, and I've seen people pushed off buildings and fallen 14 stories, car wrecks and stabbings and machete disemboweling people. Lots of ways to kill people. So all I'll say about that is, ultimately, I don't think this is a gun control issue. I think it's a human issue. And there are going to be a certain number of people who are intent on hurting other people. I'm sure we'll get into mental illness, and I don't think it's necessarily a question of mental illness all the time. But
before we go too much further,
it's a hard problem, but we have to work with it in the context that we're working with it, which is we're in the United States. There are massive amounts of firearms. There are massive amounts of AR-15, and we have a Second Amendment.
All right, before we go too much further, can we kind of get your guys' positions? And I think a lot of people are confused about what the discussion is and where you guys both kind of stand on it. The feedback I'm getting is nobody really knows where you guys are coming from. I mean, both of you guys come from the Christian perspective, which I think really has no relevancy to the gun control discussion. But SJ, your position is that you would like to see less guns, you want to see more gun regulation, you want to see more safety, you want to get rid of all guns, you want to abolish the Second Amendment. Where on the spectrum of gun control do you lie? I think that needs to be established, and then ARM could do the same.
Okay, let me clarify then. So Here's what it is. I'd love to see no guns at all. I would love it if we could go the way that Australia has gone, where people turned in their guns, or the United Kingdom has gone, and in England, where people turned in their guns. I'd love to see something like that. There were buyback programs in those two places. They were very expensive. In Australia, they taxed people quite a bit to be able to buy back all of the guns that were out there. But they were, in both cases, they were able to reduce gun deaths by at least half. And then there's places like Norway that also has been able to reduce gun rates. In fact, I'll get the stats in just a minute, but Norway's got much better rates than we do. My position is that I'd love to get rid of guns altogether. I don't think that's possible in the United States. I just don't think we have the people who will ever buy into that. And I think we have so many guns that right now I think it's pretty much not possible. I think at a state level we could possibly do something, but I'd like to see much more regulation as far as people getting guns. In fact, it's my understanding that most states, and this is actually kind of a crazy fact, most states do not require registration of guns. So that's something that I was able to find out. And there's no federal program that requires the registration of guns. So I'd love to see guns be registered. I'd love to see people who want to obtain guns have to go through mental health checks. I have all kinds of different requirements, but I definitely think that interviews of the family and friends, I think that would be very useful. I think if we had those kind of things in place, some of the crazies who are able to get guns wouldn't be able to get guns, at least as easily. And like RM points out, they'll probably go kill people anyway. So there is that fear. And so that is something to think about. But I'd like to see a lot more regulation.
All right, so
there. What RM? What if when she's talking about mental health, kind of screening, I guess. What would be your opposition to that? Or one more time?
Go ahead. You froze for a second.
I can't. What
he said you froze. He asked you, what would be your opposition to mental health assessments for various types of weapons? And I would assume that would include concealed weapons permit. And
sure.
In full disclosure, I had a concealed weapons permit. I did for many years up in Washington. I was fully licensed. I carried a couple different firearms. And there is some things you have to go through to get one. I think Kyle was asking you,
sure.
Are you against a mental assessment exam
to
determine that you're qualified and not mental, going to go shoot a bunch of people if you have a concealed weapons permit or for an assault rifle?
Sure. So I'll say a couple of things. First, the premise of that is that there is not already existing mental health screenings. There is. There absolutely is. There absolutely is in Florida. There already is screening for mental health. The second thing I'll say to that is if you look at the statistics, about 22% of mass shootings are done by people with mental health diagnosis. So I don't know exactly where it came from, this assumption that if you want to kill a lot of people, you must be insane. And I just don't think that's supported by human history, and it's certainly not supported by actual data correlating mass shooters with psychiatric disease. It's about 22%. So there is, but it's not very strong. The third thing I'll say is you're going down a path. I'll just give you an example. What if a woman's diagnosed with postpartum depression? She's not anymore, but she carried a diagnosis of postpartum depression. She's got an ex-husband. The ex-husband's violent. Are you going to tell her that she can't carry what is by far the most effective means of self-defense? You have some real issues there. But again, I think the ultimate problem with that statement is I don't think you've looked and seen what's existing already, because mental health screening absolutely already exists.
Well, let's back up just 1 second. Let me ask you a point on this. When you said that not all of these shooters are, mentally ill.
Yeah.
Could that? Just on a human factor level, I guess, could that be an accurate statement? Don't you have to have a certain level of just something off to go and shoot?
No, absolutely not. There are evil people. There just are evil people. History is replete with evil people who just want to kill people for whatever reason. There is mental illness there, but if you're going to define, you would have to redefine the DSM, right? You'd have to redefine the manual of psychiatric disease to include if you shot someone, you by definition are mentally ill. as it stands, as the field of psychiatry in medicine stands, that's just not the case. And again, I don't exactly know where the concept, looking at the whole of human history, which is replete with violence and is at the lowest point now than it ever has been, this idea that if you want to kill a lot of people, you must be crazy. There's no data that shows that, and there is data that shows that's not the case. And that's all I can say about that. In SJ, this is something that you and I certainly agree with. There is such a thing as evil, and sometimes that evil is murder, and sometimes that murder is multiple people. If you can show me some actual statistics that correlate a one-to-one mass shooter to mental illness, I'm happy to look at them. But everything I've seen, it's about 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, because those things are both quantified, obviously. There are bad people.
RM, how would you propose that we get these people? I mean, how would you propose that we prevent these kinds of issues that we've been having?
Yeah, so that's the question, and I guess to circle back and to answer what my position is, I think the Second Amendment is vital, and it's also just real. It exists. People are committed to it. It would take a massive. Hey, buddy, you want to say anything? It would take a massive legislative effort to get the 3/4 states that it would take to repeal the Second Amendment, and even at that point, you would still probably have a civil war. I don't want a civil war, but that is realistic. And if you want to talk about gun deaths, doing something like that would cause a lot of them.
Well, neither one of you are for repeal. I mean, let's not talk about
Sure.
most idealistic situation.
Yeah,
neither
so
one of you are advocating repeal of the Second Amendment, right?
My position, the Second Amendment was for a purpose. It's vital. I would love to see gun ownership increase. If you look at the text of the Second Amendment, what's interesting about Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which kind of delineates the legislative responsibilities of the federal government, is there's no standing army. We're not supposed to have a standing army. What the federal government really constitutionally ought to be doing is providing training for citizens who not only have AR-15s but have M4s, and every street's got a couple of people with a saw and an AA-12 automatic shotgun. It would be much more of a Switzerland model, but the Second Amendment is vital for two things. It will prevent tyranny, and it will prevent invasion. It's not meant for hunting. It's not meant for target shooting. It's meant to be able to outfit the typical citizen to be part of a militia. Now, that is a well-regulated, which means well-trained militia, which again ties into Article 1, Section 8. But I think gun ownership is a fantastic right that we have, but it's something that obviously needs to be used responsibly and needs to be screened in much the way that it is. So let's talk about the actual problem, though, with Parkland in particular, right? And I think it speaks to a little bit of the intellectual disconnect from some of the let's ban all guns. That's not my tickle spot, buddy. You can't get me there. So Broward County, the sheriff's department over 6 years had 39 calls about Nicholas Cruz, right? That's the macro view. The immediate view was there was an officer there. He was armed. He didn't engage the shooter. That's despite protocol. And people are blaming some of the commanders there. But the fact is, nobody actually engaged the shooter while he was shooting. They stood outside. And then back up to a national level, you have the FBI, who also knew about Nicholas Cruz, who also knew about Omar Mateen, who shot up Orlando, another Florida location. We're talking about it. You have these instances of, yes, someone who got their hands on a weapon that can kill a lot of people, and it's awful, it's terrible, and everyone agrees with that. But they're committed to mass murder. And I would kind of I would challenge you to name a piece of legislation that would have prevented someone who is committed to mass murder to do it, because they don't care about any laws.
But why only here, though? That's my question. If it has nothing to do with the gun laws, why is it only America that it's happening over and over and over again?
It's not. I reject that premise entirely. You look at France, which has draconian firearm ownership laws, and you had some guys with AK-47 shoot up Paris.
Sure, it happens, but I mean, not to the extent that it does here. And like you said, if somebody's committed to mass shooting, then you would think that would be worldwide, but it's only happening at the rate that it is here.
In a lot of countries, it's not guns; it's actual missiles fired into your house. There's violence everywhere, and it takes different forms. But I'll push back on that assumption, that premise that you just kind of included in there, that it only happens here. So the FBI compiles statistics. So does the CDC about death, and we can get to that a little bit. You know how many rifle murders there were compared to handgun murders? And I would concede that firearms are responsible for by far the majority of murders in the United States. I mean, have y'all looked at it? Can y'all guess? What's a guess?
For what?
How many deaths rifles are responsible for? Because we're talking about these very sensationalized, truly heinous crimes committed with AR-15s, which look very, very scary because cosmetically they look like an M4, right? I mean, I'll just tell you, and y'all can all look it up, but you just look up FBI expanded homicide tables. Total firearm deaths, 8,653. Rifles, 332 of those. And that includes these mass shootings. Shotguns, 362. So there are more shotguns, but handguns are by far the culprit, like 90-something%, 6,251.
But you're talking here, right?
I'm talking about in the United States. So when you're talking about, let's get rid of assault rifles, and I'm not going to get into what that term means because it's nebulous and kind of meaningless. You're talking about a drop in the bucket of total murders, which is a drop in the bucket of preventable deaths. And
if it saves one child, isn't that worth it?
Well, if you want to save one child, this is where you're going to focus on.
But I'm not seeing that reasoning.
But hold on. My point. So let me back up. Let me back up. I want to clarify something. When I was talking just a second ago, I wasn't talking about banning any particular style of weapon. My point was that when you say that if somebody is dead set on committing a mass shooting, like they're committed to it.
Sure.
I don't think it would be. I think you have to be disingenuous to say that it's equally spread across the world.
It's much worse in other places.
Right. So why, if somebody's going to be set on committing mass shooting, you would think that it would be kind of stacked evenly around, but it seems like it's just centralized here. The other countries have it.
It's not centralized here. Look at the statistics, and you can look at either homicide rates per 1,000 people or 100,000 people.
We're talking mass shootings, not homicides. Mass shootings.
Let's get SJ in here real quick. SJ, so I mean, would you rather have more laws when it comes to assault rifles? And we're gonna, just for the sake of this discussion, let's assume any assault rifle is something that could be fully automatically converted. It's obviously we all know that it's a very loose term, but let's just say any fully automatic weapon that has 15 or more in their clip or something, high capacity clip. So SJ, would you focus more on trying to eliminate those types of weapons?
Can I pause? Did you say automatic weapons?
Yes.
Okay, you know that automatic weapons are illegal for all intents and purposes.
No, they're not illegal. You can own an automatic weapon if you have a sales license.
Yeah, you can. How many people do, and how many people have committed
but you just said they're illegal. They're not illegal if you own a.
No, I said for all intents and purposes they're illegal.
But a certain weapon can be modified with a simple. I'm not going to tell people to do it, but you can modify a semi-automatic to an automatic pretty easily. Okay, so there's kits to do that. So any weapon that can be modified from a semi-automatic to an automatic. Let's just call that an assault rifle for this discussion. RJ, would you rather eliminate those kinds of weapons, or would you rather eliminate like the handguns? What do you have a bigger issue with as far as personal safety and things of that nature? Because I'm on board with the assault rifle things to a degree. I'm not on board in getting rid of handguns. So where would you be on that?
I actually agree with you. I don't, and I can see RM's point as far as the handguns and the woman trying to protect herself in her house against somebody who's crazy. That would be a big issue. But as far as the assault rifles, I'm completely against those. I don't see a reason why we need those.
Okay.
And so what I'll answer that, I guess, is if you're talking about rifles compared to handguns, again, we're talking about 332 murders compared to 6,251. What you're doing is trying to create a policy based on kind of an emotional,
how many mass shootings have been done with handguns?
data-driven response.
But Arm, let me ask you, how many mass shootings have ever been done with handguns in schools?
Look at West Virginia. That was all handguns.
One.
We have.
One.
Think about
One.
Mandalay. Think about
That's true,
Mandalay
with
Bay in Las Vegas. The shooter who was in Mandalay Bay.
Yeah, exactly. The vast majority of mass shootings are going to be assault weapons. Yes, there have been ones with some other types of handguns and with just by replacing the clips. But even then, if I'm not mistaken, those shootings did have high capacity clips for handguns. I think it was over 9, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that.
What is the need for that gun? That's a better question. What is the need for anyone to have any type of assault rifle?
Well, first we're talking about the Second Amendment, which is a right. And
But that was issued for people who had muskets at the time, not assault rifles.
we are Skyping and you're live streaming on YouTube and you're going to tweet about this. Does the First Amendment protection apply to those? Because that's the argument you're making.
No, it's not. That's a false analogy. If I've
No, it's absolutely not. If we're going to say,
it most certainly is a false analogy.
The problem
You're talking about freedom of speech, and you're not. The difference is freedom. Well, hang on. The freedom of speech is different on. But freedom of speech is freedom.
About the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, and all the amendments apply to existing technology at the time. Then what you're saying, what you have to say is, the First Amendment applies to letters, and the Second Amendment applies to muskets. And
but here's the problem with that analogy. Freedom of speech is the ability to address problems with the governments without fear of reprisal. Sure. And it doesn't matter what platform you have on that. YouTube, we don't have freedom of speech. I can tell you right now, there is no such thing as freedom of speech on YouTube. You're on their platform. Okay? So the freedom of speech has to do with addressing the things with the government. Now, technology does change, absolutely. But I think Kyle makes a very good point, and you seem to just kind of glass over it. Back then with the well-regulated militia, and yes, the Supreme Court has determined that also it means for personal safety. They were muskets. I don't think they had the forethought to say, oh, if I have a weapon that can just, instantly pretty much obliterate, a couple dozen people, they probably would have thought twice on how they worded that. Because things do change.
They had repeating rifles. This is technology that wasn't in common use, but you're acting like all they had was flintlock pistols, and that's just not the case. And they did.
Let's go a different route then. Let's go a different route.
Lots of people at one time, but I think
would you support somebody having a grenade launcher, for instance?
RPGs for everybody.
And
that's exciting.
Our producer was just like, yes,
is that something that you would? Is that something that you would support?
Grenade launchers? No, I'll tell you what I would support. And obviously, this is going to.
Hold on. Why would you not support that if any type of artillery should be covered under the Second Amendment? Where is your cutoff point, and who decides what that cutoff point is?
I think from my cutoff point, and ultimately, from a practical standpoint, you're going to have the Supreme Court deciding things like Heller to decide the cutoff point. But my personal opinion is I would love to see the Second Amendment expanded. By expanded, I mean kind of take a second look at the National Firearms Act and let people arm themselves to the extent that they could function as a credible soldier. And that would mean small arms like M4s and, again, an occasional saw. I don't think that's unreasonable. And if you're going to make an analogy to muskets in the 1770s, I think that's the proper analogy. That was the modern weapon of war that the British redcoats were carrying. And I don't think
we should allow people to arm themselves wherever they feel comfortable with. I mean, is that a logical approach to this problem?
Do you agree?
Why is it not? I'll tell you a couple examples.
I'm trying to get you in here, SJ.
Yeah, no worries.
Let's go to SJ. Hold on one second.
Let's go to SJ real quick, because I really want her to weigh in on that. Does she agree or disagree with the argument that weapons do change? And there has to be some kind of regulation with it, because I don't think the forefathers had in mind they were going to have the mass destruction ability that we have today. I mean, obviously, they had no idea that we had going to have these types of weapons.
Is it logical, SJ, to arm somebody with a grenade launcher?
No. No,
Why not?
I don't think that's.
But I really want one. It would be really cool.
Because imagine it's like a slippery slope. Once you start, it's the same thing with arming people with these automatic weapons. Why do they need these? They don't need them for hunting. They don't need them for.
SJ, you got to take a step back. Nobody is armed with an automatic weapon. There's been no mass shooting with an automatic weapon, modified or not. They've been massively hard to get and incredibly expensive. You can't buy one that was made after 1980 something.
Let's say high capacity round.
Yeah, I mean, I've already said we're going to use assault rifle.
I mean, have you seen Keanu shredding the chorus?
Okay.
You don't need a high capacity round. You just need a lot of.
Do you think they should? Okay, let me ask you this: do you think they should have certain types of talons? Bullets that should be able to pierce through armor-piercing what are they called? Kevlar. Should that be legal?
You can go to Cabela's and buy a Barrett 50 caliber.
Yeah, but there are certain types of shredders bullets, right, that are illegal, correct?
Sure.
Okay. Do you think those should be legal under any circumstances where anybody can go buy these type of shredding talon bullets that can penetrate Kevlar and they're called cop killers? Should those be legal?
Well, again, you live somewhere where you could go down the street and buy a 50 caliber rifle. That's an anti. Yes, you do. Unless you don't have.
I have no idea where to go get a 50 cal, and I used to.
Seriously?
I used to work with 50
you
cal.
can.
I mean, I worked right next to 50 cal for many years. I was on a Navy boat.
That's not even an anti-personnel round.
That is true.
That's an anti-material round. That's meant to be put through engine blocks. You can buy. We're talking about.
It's an anti small craft, watercraft. A 50 cal is optimal for.
Sure, and I could go buy one tomorrow.
Really, I would have no idea where to go get one. Honestly, I mean, do they pay them or Amazon?
You could literally go to anywhere that sells guns, and they would be able to get you a 50 caliber rifle. That's just a fact.
I don't know where. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Do you have any hunting and fishing stores? There's a Cabela's 20 minutes from my house. If you give me $8,000, I'll get you one.
Yeah.
No, they're probably.
No, I think Steve. As far as having something that can pierce, having bullets that can pierce Kevlar, I think that's a huge problem. I think that should be illegal.
Yeah, I mean, what would be the need for it? I mean, I don't know too many criminal situations where
if I can speak to that, here's again, we're talking rights, not needs, and these rights in America are inalienable. Shall not be infringed. So that's language you got to deal with.
Is it worth the trade-off?
The purpose for it. Let's talk about the purpose of the Second Amendment, because I think that's kind of one of the critical inflection points with this. It's not for hunting. It's not for target shooting. It's to be a guard against government tyranny, and one of the kind of side effects is it protects us from invasion. That was obviously.
It was also for the conscription too, though. The conscription is because they had conscription back then, and basically they had their own mustard skin and well-regulated militia. But yes, it was for prevent. Here's the thing: it was prevent tyranny from the government in case there had been an uprising.
Sure.
Let's be realistic. Nowadays, if there's going to be uprising, the government's going to squash you anyways.
That's absolutely not true.
I love to think otherwise, but I have to be pragmatic. I don't think most people are going to be able to stand up to the government. As ex-military,
before we get out of control though on this, let's not get out of hand. Let's kind of stay on topic. Arian, let me ask you a question. Part of the Second Amendment that you were talking about earlier stated that it had to be a well-trained militia. Would you say that now that part of the Second Amendment is being upheld? Do we have people who are well trained that could act as a militia?
What I would say is, I think I'm not going to get into how well the federal government is upheld its roles in per Article 1, Section 8. But no, I think that's a fair point. I think
right?
The way I'd love to see it, if I could structure it again within the bounds of the Constitution, is people could privately own military-grade weapons. That means fully automatic weapons. But part of that whole, the Army is not to be funded for any period of more than 2 years, and you get that Army from the population, is the government doesn't do a great job. We can talk about the National Guard, but I would love to see the federal government provide that sort of training for full military weapons, so they could field a proper militia. Yeah. So
why are you holding them by the throat to uphold one part of the Second Amendment, but turning a blind eye to the whole training part? Because
I'm saying that I want
ultimately.
I would love to do that. I would love for some special ops guys or some range instructors to, regularly go around and provide that sort of training. I think that'd be fantastic.
Well,
and I think
why isn't it happening?
True to the context of the Constitution.
Why isn't it happening?
Let's go back to 1945 in Wickard versus Filburn, when the federal government started expanding their role and ignoring everything that's in Article 1, Section 8. That's
except
long
that you can own an assault rifle. They're gonna uphold that end, but not the "we'll train you how to use it" part.
Oh,
who should provide the training, if I can ask, by the way? I mean, who's responsible for that? If I wanted to go get trained to be familiar with a firearm and get proper safety, is the government obligated to give you training for that, or is that something you personally have to do that should be mandated? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Can I piggyback on that real quick? Because I want to
please
mention something with training. They're trying to,
Sure.
One of the things is for teachers, K through 12 teachers are being offered training and they are given $500 towards this training from the government. And that's something that's going on now in Florida. So that's out there. I don't like that at all. I don't like the idea of my kids being in schools and their teachers all have guns. I think that's terrible, because I can already see that what happens if the kids somehow get access to those guns.
I think it's a very bad idea too, but I got to tell you, in
shot
junior high,
a couple weeks ago during training. They were having a training exercise.
In junior high, I took archery. We had archery with actual bows and arrows.
You are old, Steve.
Yeah, but yeah, tell me about it. We're like cowboys and Indians. But nowadays that would never happen. Those would be completely not even on school property, because they'd be considered weapons, obviously, and they are weapons. But in 7th and 8th grade, we took archery. Nobody thought twice about it. Back 1800s, people had weapons, people had shotguns, people had rifles. You didn't see a lot of the mass shootings. Do you think that something has changed fundamentally in society, where it's not so much the weapons, but it's the mindset that they have that of the sanctity of human life? Do you think there's been something that has changed fundamentally in the mindset of people? Is that possible? Because again, the weapons have always been there, but only recently have you had these absolutely horrific mass shootings, and it's escalating. And I'm sorry, I've always been pro guns. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, I have a concealed weapons permit, or I did. But I do agree a little bit with SJ here. Something needs to change. Something needs to be changed, because we have now kids dying in schools that should have never happened.
I'll speak to that a little bit. I think that there is something that's changed. It all started with Columbine. That was the first big shooting in a school, and that happened a number of years ago. And since then, we've had a lot of copycats. But one of the things that's happened is there are a lot of depressed kids out there. There are a lot of depressed kids, and there are a lot of kids on medication, and there are a lot of kids who start medication very early because their parents and teachers tell them they have ADD, and they put them on Ritalin, so they become accustomed to taking these drugs. And by the time they get into college, a lot of them, and I see them in college, they're very, very depressed kids, some. And some have a lot of mental issues going on. And I think that speaks to, and I'm not sure exactly what turned in society that made it like that, but there's something going on with Medication Nation right now.
Social media too.
I think you know what? I think both of you guys have a point there. What about that, RM? Do you think that there's something to social media and the overprescriptions of things like Ritalin?
Oh, I'm pretty familiar with drugs. I do think that in general people are over medicated. I would challenge you, SJ, to find an actual correlation between that. I feel like that's just kind of you making guesses. I haven't seen anything that speaks to that particular thing.
No, I haven't either, RM. I'm just pointing out one thing that it's an observation. It's anecdotal too. So
Sure,
it's
sure.
just something I'm just pointing out because I'm trying to come up with possibilities of what could be impacting.
Well, and this is something that we could talk about for hours and hours and hours. But I do think one thing has changed somewhat. And again, you're just going to stick me with there. I'm not trying to attack or start a huge argument. But you spoke to Columbine. One of the things that those two kids did, or one of the motivators for them, was they kind of internalized this idea that humans were animals and survival of the fittest was the way of the world.
Oh, RM.
Yeah, that's gonna be going down a rabbit hole. We're not going to go down tonight because
like I said,
we can find just as many Christians who have done horrific things in the name of their Lord. So I don't think that's
and the phrase "survival of the fittest" you've already used incorrectly.
That's not
so
a good route to go down.
That's a legitimate point. We don't have to go down to it, but the fact is that's
since we kind of bring this up, and I really hate to, but it's kind of important here because the discussions we've had before with flat earthers and things of that nature, everything seems to actually come back to a religious standpoint. Now, I mean, I'm not going to talk specifically about your guys' religious viewpoints unless you want to, but you've already said from the beginning there was something in your religious viewpoints that has fostered your narrative on your world, the theory of the world that you have, your worldview, which, by the way, I don't particularly like that term, but let's say the worldview you have, and you do take it from the position of, oh, well, evolution, you specifically, but some creationists would be like, evolution's wrong, and because evolution's wrong, therefore these things happen. And is that the route you're kind of going? Or is it?
No, I'm saying what you do is, y'all are familiar with axioms, I'm assuming, but the foundational presuppositions, and they matter. And the axiom of the United States is that we're endowed by our capital C Creator, and certainly the public education system is.
Wait.
Of course it is.
Run that by me again.
The axiom, the foundational presupposition, is found in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, and it says we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident truth is an axiom. That we're endowed by our capital C Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Yeah, but you understand? Okay, but the problem that you run into there is an equivocation problem because the type of deity they're talking about is not the Christian deity to begin with, and it's not even. It's basically a position on these are self-evident things, that these are inalienable rights, and whatever the Creator is. But that was the mindset that they had, but they were more deist. You're saying though,
some of them were deists and some of them were Christians, but
there were definitely some Christians.
They were
sporadically,
Christians,
but that was not what they were intended. This was not a theistic.
What they were,
Christian nation.
that's what they intended.
No, this was not founded as a Christian nation, I assure you.
No,
in fact,
it was founded as a nation that recognized that there was a personal God who imparted rights. It sure wasn't founded that government.
They kind of had to at the time. I mean,
that was the general overview. Yeah,
but they assert that, but you can. I guarantee you can find nothing in Federalist Papers, nothing in writing of the founders to support that assertion whatsoever.
I bet there's not. They would have been ran out of the country.
Yeah, no,
so they're just making stuff up, though. I can't argue with that.
I'm just saying. I think if we're on, if we're.
But I can't argue with you just saying. There's no point.
Can I? I mean.
But you can't really speak to that either. What you're saying.
They actually wrote it. It's in the language. Of course, I can speak to that.
But what you're thinking, you're considering that as the Christian God. That's what Steve is just saying.
It's not God. I'm saying it's a personal God from which.
Well, that is a theistic.
Okay, so that could be anybody. So that it doesn't really mean anything. It could be any God that you wanted to. It could be Krishna or Buddha or.
By definition, isn't atheism, which doesn't have access to any sort of personal deity. And I'm not saying Christian God. You're putting that into my mouth. I'm perfectly aware that a lot of times are deists.
So the Constitution doesn't cover
atheism. But as an atheist, you don't have that to point to.
But whose God was it founded on then?
Yeah, that's my question as well. whose personal God was it founded upon then?
If we were to go back then, the vast majority of people were Christian here in the United States. And even if we go back to the late 1940s, 96% of people identified as theists, and most of them, the vast majority in that number,
Quakers
are Christians.
and Puritans, and all of them.
Talking about
there's a whole header of Christianity. There's still a lot of division that when you just say Christianity.
Which one were they pointing to?
Yeah, exactly.
Which what did you say?
Which deity were they pointing to?
You're not Mennonites.
I'm just pointing that the founding fathers were. I mean, if you went back and we looked at each founding father, I'd say that they were probably the mass majority of them were. I'm
Christians. Talking about in the writing. Which one were they talking about?
They would have been talking about the Judeo-Christian God.
They were what?
The Judeo-Christian God of the Bible. Of course, that's what they were talking about. But the point is, that's historical fact. You cannot like it if you don't want. That's fine. But it doesn't really matter. The specific answer to that is it doesn't matter to you if you're an atheist, because it's not talking about someone you recognize as existing, which means you have to reject that axiom. I think this is a little bit of a rabbit trail.
Well, the reason I ask it because I think that religious beliefs really do form a lot of our opinions on things. And you had mentioned something about survival of the fittest, and you're going down that evolution route. So I can assume you deny evolution, right? I mean, is that a safe assumption? You're not. By the way, you're not a flat earther, right?
Yeah, a Darwinian macroevolutionary process is scientific garbage.
Okay, so you're not a flat earther, right? Let's just get out of the way.
It's round.
Okay, but you are a young Earth creationist.
Yeah.
Okay, so you follow the Hovind type thing.
Hovind follows me type, please.
Oh, okay. Hovind follows you. So okay, so
we kind of both follow the same thing.
Okay, so but you are that type of young Earth creationist. So evolution bad, macroevolution doesn't have. And you do. And by the way, you not doxing you. You have it on your Twitter. One sec. This is on your Twitter, so I'm not putting anything out there that's not public information.
No.
You are an anesthesiologist. So you have a medical degree.
I do.
Obviously educated. You're not an idiot, right? I mean, you are a well-educated individual, correct? Okay. I just want to establish that because it's just confusing to me. Then when somebody is in the medical profession and they don't accept evolution, it compartmentalizes to me.
You'll actually find that very, very few doctors accept macroevolution.
I have never found one that doesn't, so I don't think that really holds.
Don't know where you are, but not here.
I've actually did a debate with macroevolution, and the person actually changed their position and left younger.
I think we need to call Cy Gart here.
Cy Gart! Oh, let's get Cy.
SJ.
Yeah, that's
Cy. I like Cy. We could have
it's kind of funny though.
That would be a fantastic conversation.
Cy Gart is really smart. Yeah, I really like that guy.
I'm serious. We love Cy here.
I love him.
So let's circle back around though.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I didn't mean to go down the rabbit trail, but I just find we have a lot of discussions, and it really does seem that a lot of it comes back to this. It really, honestly, does. It comes back to religiosity and conspiracy theory, and I'm sorry I have to say that young Earth creationism to me is a type of conspiracy theory, but it seems to always come around to that. So it's just kind of interesting that even in a gun debate, that's still predicated on religiosity.
But
let me point out actually
that SJ is kind of the singularity here. I mean, she's not going down that.
But she's not a young Earth creationist.
Was shocking to me though. I mean, I was surprised that. I mean, I guess you to some point kind of paint people in a corner unfairly at times. You know, I think that some people may consider all atheists just to be horrible human beings who go around eating babies all the time. And
only if they cook properly.
I did the same thing with SJ, I think, because I thought SJ was
that's funny.
a lot more conservative, especially in this kind of sense. So SJ, you surprised me when you came out not really against and kind of lined up with my views.
And it's funny, is in the Skype call we have 2 atheists, 2 Christians, and an agnostic, so we got a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
but we're all getting along.
What's good about this particular? Shall we get pragmatic and actually try to find a solution
to gun control?
One can be found
for gun control.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I really, I thought, well, that's what I was asking SJ before. What does she think's changed? Because if whatever's changed, that needs to be unchanged or something.
Well, let me point out some other things that have changed. So I mentioned a couple of things with medications and that kind of thing, but also when I said 96% of people were theists back in the late 1940s, now we're down to 86%. Atheists have actually doubled from about 1.5% to about 3.5%. Or more than doubled. So in the United States. So we've seen some changes in the United States with respect to religion. We've also seen some other sorts of things going on. Like there is a huge wealth disparity between the rich and the poor. The rich get richer, like they say, and the poor get poorer. And the top 1% are taking up an enormous portion of the income in the United States relative to how much they should be taking in their size. So those sorts of things lead to people's depression.
So you're talking about class warfare. The
yeah,
difference in the class warfare.
I mean, even
and
if you go back to
okay.
the 1970s, the 1960s, you only needed dual income couples weren't something back then. The mother was home mostly with the kids,
Correct.
and the father was working, and there was just a different society where people were raised. Now people are raised where both parents are working in many cases because they can't afford to live without both parents working, and in many cases you've got kids who come home and they have nothing to do, and they're in the house. They come in and they start playing on video games, violent video games. I mean, there's so many things going on right now that are impacting people in a different way than happened back in the 60s and 70s and 30s and 40s and that kind of thing. So
I agree with you, but I don't agree.
The victims are disproportionately, though. I think it doesn't correspond with the shooter in a lot of cases. Like you take Las Vegas and especially Sandy Hook. The victims that these people are choosing to shoot and kill oftentimes have absolutely nothing to do with whatever set them off in the first place.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry.
What would be kind of a drive for that, you think? Because I mean, usually, like back in the day, like in the 80s, you had a lot of the where the term going postal came from. You would have post office employees who were really angry with how they were being treated at work, and they would go to the post office and shoot up the post office. But there was a correlation between the shooter and the post office because that's where they worked. They were obviously
the stress involved with the job.
Right, but nowadays the targets are not stemming from what set that person off. So there's a obvious shift now.
There's a disconnect there, yeah.
Yeah. So any ideas as to what could be the driving force?
I think in a lot of these cases, Kyle, a lot of these people who are committing these kind of crimes feel like they're outcasts. They feel like they're outcasts in society. And so for whatever reason, I'm not sure exactly why maybe they were bullied in school. Bullying is horrible. And we do see that going on in the schools. And so maybe the kids were bullied and mistreated. And then they decide they're going to just take it out on society. And so we see that time and again with these shooters.
I do think you make a good point there, but I do want to backtrack a little bit because I do not agree with you on the video games. We have some gamers in here. I play the video games. I think that has negligible, if any, effect on it. I think, matter of fact, it's actually some studies out there that people that do video games actually are able to take out their aggressions more and less likely because they have an understanding of fantasy and reality. I've never wanted to go out and commit a mass shooting, even though I'll go play, even Castle Wolfenstein, one of the first, shooters, or Doom, or anything of those natures that we all grew up with.
Weed.
Yeah, he just gets high. So, but I mean, I like first-person shooters, and I like games like that. I love Battlefield, 1950.
Yeah, and that has been quantified, SJ. That's not you're not going to find any data to help you make that correlation.
Yeah, I just want to throw that out there because I'm going to have Rags on in next week, and he is a big-time gamer. He has like 250,000 subs, and we are going to be talking about Gamergate a little bit. However, I do want to touch on exactly what you just talked about. If that in the violence is contributed to video games, because I see no correlation.
Although there is swatting. That's
okay. But that's okay. Good point. But that's somebody else. That's just being a troll. That's just being a dick. So.
I do have to say the best game to get your anger out is drunken bar fights. It's fun.
I used to do those in real life.
Yeah, but nowadays you die with a drunken bar fight. In the old days, like my days, you just break a knuckle or something, you get a bloody nose. Nowadays, they'll kill you in a bar fight.
Well, if you die in this game, you just come back. So.
Oh, okay.
What about silencers, REM? Should people be allowed to have a silencer?
You ever shot a gun with a silencer?
Hey,
I've never shot a gun.
what's
period.
that?
So it turns into something that you need ear protection for to something that you don't. It's unmistakably.
Hold on.
If your conception of silencers,
Silencers don't work like
that?
that. Movies. Silencers are not very effective. Matter of fact, most
No.
times don't.
I'll tell you, silencers have
Not
been.
like a movie where you go, and it just kind of goes. You still hear it.
Yeah, you hear it, but it's more. I mean, I couldn't tell you his name, but there's a big push to actually get that taken off the National Firearms Act, so you don't need the license that you have to get things like fully automatic weapons and silencers, because it's not Hollywood. It doesn't make it a. I mean, it just makes it so you don't actually have to wear ear protection to protect your hearing. Silencers. I'd love a silencer. Guns are loud. When you shoot guns, they're loud. Having a silencer isn't going to make it so it doesn't sound like a gun, but it's going to make it so you're not in nearly as much danger of losing your hearing from shooting a lot.
Yeah, silencer's not going to affect anything beyond your own personal, maybe your hearing. So I don't give a crap about silencers. It's not a non-issue.
Except for what they're used for sometimes. That's the only.
They really aren't used in that many crimes.
No,
there's a reason why they're illegal.
They're illegal for the same kind of reason that things like, AR-15s are put out as something, because they kind of look scary, but functionally.
Or it's being used for something that it shouldn't be used for.
But again, if you're going to talk about let's get rid of the things being used for something, you need to be talking about handguns and not rifles, because it's 20 times more responsible for homicides, and they absolutely can and have been used for mass shootings.
Granted, in one-on-one situations, you know what I'm saying. You know where I'm going with this. One-on-one, 2-on-4, 6-on-8, whatever. In mass shootings, though, where schools are being targeted, are people getting shot with handguns, or are they getting shot with assault rifles?
Yeah, in West Virginia, sometimes they're being shot.
Okay, one out of.
I think
one. You got 1%. What about the other 99%?
Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about all of them since 1950, because this goes back to something you mentioned. I think it's worth saying, because again, we're trying to find some way forward, and I think there is a way forward, because we all want the same goal again. Since 1950, there have been 2 mass shootings that were not committed in a gun-free zone, just 2. So, SJ, I know you hate the idea of arming teachers, and maybe let's not arm teachers, but the first thing to do, and I think this is something that everyone should get behind, even though it seems scary, is these are government buildings. They should be hardened targets, and that's probably the case for all gun-free zones. If every other government building, from the Social Security Administration to the White House, is a hard target, why are schools not a hard target? The fact that the deterrent effect alone would prevent a lot of this stuff. Someone's not going to target a middle school if they know that a couple of teachers, and don't kid yourself, there are plenty of veterans who have extensive firearm use who are teaching in public schools. There are plenty of teachers in public schools who already carry elsewhere. It's just not this insurmountable, monstrous, inconceivable thing to get teachers in public schools to carry. And you can do a response. I mean, you say, well, what if a kid gets a hold of a gun? I mean,
that isn't my concern. My concern isn't so much the kid getting a hold of a gun. My concern is teachers there to educate. The teacher's not there to be armed police. They're not. That's not their job description.
Sure.
And again, I think that if somebody's licensed to carry one, I have less of an issue with it. But accidents still happen, and I don't really think that arming teachers is the way to go, unless very rare circumstances. Like even the guy that even that one teacher was an off-duty deputy sheriff, and he still fired a round accidentally.
But Steve, see, this is where I'm conflicted on this issue. Now, I'm not a gun proponent, but I think that in the current climate that we have now, it's kind of gotten to the point where you really don't have a choice unless you're going to be willing to send just the teachers and students in there to kind of fend for themselves.
You know what? I say
either
arm the
have
students. Start at 3 years old. Give
you
them
either
give
have
them
to
a double shot
you
guarantee.
either have to arm the teachers or you have to
I don't
put
think so.
guards or something at the school.
And so that's
you
your other
can't-
option. It's a hardened target.
Yeah,
And
you
metal
can't
detectors.
Yeah,
well,
that would work
no,
too.
hang on. I'm
But
against
you can't
metal.
send them in there. You can't send them in there just fending for themselves. It's gotten to the point now. It sucks, but it's gotten to the point now where you don't know going into that school each day if that's going to be your last day or not. And I would feel more comfortable, even though I'm not a gun proponent. I would feel more comfortable knowing that there are people there that are armed and can.
I'm fine with
situation
hard guards. I'm fine
if it
with
comes
that.
up.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think that's fine. If you want a guard that has armed guard, I get that. The metal detectors are hit and miss. The problem with that is that metal detectors are actually, fine for like weaponry, like knives and stuff like that. And yeah, with a gun. But I think that if a kid wanted to bring in an AR-15, he's not going to go through the metal detector. There's ways around that.
They're coming from outside the school. They're going to walk right through the metal detector and start shooting kids. Now,
that's all they need to do too. With an AR-15, they're going to come in right through the metal detector and start shooting.
But it wouldn't hurt. I mean, stuff like that wouldn't hurt.
No,
I'm not against metal detectors like that. No, but
hardening a target that should be hardened because right now it's soft, and that's why it's such a common.
Justin,
for these things, they know that there's no one who's going to shoot back. I will say this is the kind of discussion that we need to be having to actually get somewhere.
Yeah, I agree.
Because this is somewhere we can find common ground and we can work for a solution. And I'll tell you, it's something else that you said talking about sheriffs. The other issue that we got to address is law enforcement has to do their jobs, and there are too many of these cases where they don't. And that's on a federal level, and it's on a ground level. That's a serious issue, and it hasn't been talked enough about it. The sheriff of Broward County is not in the news, and he should be. He shouldn't be the sheriff of Broward County anymore. There were serious missed red flags. There's no point in having all of these different safeguards if they're ignored. There's no point in having a line where you can call the FBI, where Nicholas Cruz himself called and said, "I'm a threat," and nothing was done.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't think anybody's going to give you any pushback on that. I agree. Just real quick, I want to say that my webmaster is actually who hosts my website is in the live chat, and he makes a great point. His name's Justin. He said metal detectors just tell you that someone is armed. It's not going to stop them.
That's
and
right.
I think he makes a really good point on that. A metal detector is going to
But
tell
it
you if
doesn't
they're
hurt.
armed.
It wouldn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt, but it's not going to be the solution.
It's not a fail-safe, but it's a
metal detectors. The metal detectors are there for the people that go, "Oh, I'm going to bring a switchblade in." That's a far better.
And if it gets the switchblade out, then it was worth the investment.
Sure, but we're talking about gun control, right? Metal detectors for gun control, not really.
I think that's a fair point, though.
It doesn't hurt.
London disarmed, and right now they're using Cookie Monster to sweep the streets of garden trowels because they're having so much knife crime. I don't know if y'all seen that. It's pretty funny.
RM, did you get them to go after their pencils?
No. But I thought that was a good meme.
SJ, can I ask you, SJ, have you fired a weapon before?
No.
Okay, you've never fired any type of firearm. Okay.
Mm-mm.
Kyle, have you?
I have not. No.
I know Frankie has.
I've just never been into them at all. I didn't have anything against them up until recently when these kind of things kept escalating. I just never thought about them. It was just never anything that really crossed my mind. But I think now, going back, just like the school thing, I think now it has to cross your mind at some point. We're kind of in a really bad situation to where ultimately, like, it's nice to theorize what would be the ideal situation. Like, what could we do to be like say Japan? But there's so many guns now that are in this country. Getting rid of them is just not an option. It's just not realistic to, in any way, shape, or form, think that you're going to get everybody's guns. They're going to hand them over.
They're not going to hand them over.
People are going to get guns if they want them. But I think that it should be made as difficult as possible for somebody in a and I disagree with obviously with RM in his statement that one out of however many is mentally ill. I think to a certain level they all have to be mentally ill.
That's true, though. That's actual data. Unless you're going to.
Well, I think Kyle's saying though. I think kind of saying that if you go up and shoot a school, you've got mental problems.
Right. There's something you
It's
cannot be
self-evident.
normal. You cannot be normal and kill anyone. I mean, you can't.
That's a statement that ignores all of the history of mass atrocities that have committed by completely.
That does not. It just shows that they didn't get treatment for it. That's all that shows. It just shows that they weren't diagnosed. But it doesn't take a doctor in any way, shape, or form to see that if you are able to shoot into somebody else and in their life, not once but multiple times, there's something
and kids.
fucked
I mean,
in your head.
RJ, do you agree?
You can't back that up with anything except. I mean, your premise there is people are good, and if they're not,
dead bodies, the body bags back that up. Every single body bag backs up the fact that there's something.
The body bags back up the fact that evil exists in this world.
So let me. I want to ask you.
You're going to tell me that you can be normal and kill someone else.
No,
I mean,
Hitler seems pretty unstable.
No, I think you can under the right circumstances, but you're not talking about.
I'm not talking. I'm talking about mass shootings. That's the circumstance.
He's talking about mass shootings, kids going into a school and killing kids.
Can you do that and still be normal?
Wait.
You guys are the Christians. You're supposed to be the one who are supposed to be taking the higher morality road.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's why we know.
Be normal and just shoot
that's
somebody.
Why we know that it's not that sin, even sin on the scale of shooting up a school full of kids, is not necessarily predicated on mental illness. That's exactly why I'm
okay, wait. I'm curious. I really am curious. I really am curious. First, I want to get SJ's opinion. SJ, do you think if a person goes into a school and starts shooting a bunch of kids, are you going to say that person is mentally sound? And I'm not talking about medical discussion. None of us. I mean, obviously,
that's what we have.
But none of us are psychologists. But
when you're talking about screening, you have to be talking about something you can quantify, which means you have to be talking about an actual psychiatric diagnosis.
I can quantify the dead body.
Yeah, you can quantify.
But that's a useless.
We're talking. Okay, I'm talking about after the fact.
Useless for actually creating.
What's after the fact?
Mental illness. What's your definition of mental illness? What's your
definition? There is definition of mental illness. It's psychiatry. There's a field. There's a manual for it. You can look at it.
Yes, I have a DSM-3 here. I don't have a DSM-5, but I do have a DSM-3 here, so I know what they go by. But here, after the fact,
if I were Steve, if I were to talk about that, I'd say there are definitely some portion of the people who do that who are psychopaths, and that is a mental illness, or they're sociopaths. They have no empathy for other people. Clearly, you can't have empathy if you're going to go in and shoot up a bunch of people like that.
So would you say that a person who goes in and shoots up a school with a bunch of kids, would you say they're mentally well?
No.
Okay. Would you, RM?
They can be mentally well. Yes, absolutely.
No, I'm sorry. They cannot.
That can't be. That
freaking
can't be
way
your
can you convince me
that cannot be your
that
position.
Maybe somebody come with a PhD.
There are an enormous number of people.
I could be wrong. Well, hang on, let me finish my thing on this.
And educated and slaughtered millions of people.
Let me finish my statement on this, please.
Joseph Stalin mentally ill.
I really want to.
Yes.
Hang on.
Based on
absolutely he was. Absolutely he was.
We're making a new thing. It's not based on psychiatry. It's not based on any sort of medical fact.
You can call it whatever you want to. There's something off with you if you're able to do that.
Let's get this out, please.
I mean, I can't believe we're having this argument.
I would love to have. We need to get Shannon in here. Get Shannon, please, because Shannon's got experience with psychology.
We don't.
We need a psychologist because I want to know.
No, we don't. That's the thing. You don't need anyone else to see that.
I might be wrong. I'm open. I might be wrong, but I want somebody to explain to me how somebody could go in, shoot a school full of kids, and another person look at that person and go, "Hey, you know what? You might be okay. You may not."
Let me turn it back to you, RM. Do you think Joseph Stalin was sane?
Absolutely, he was sane. Have you read what he wrote? Adolf Hitler was sane. Goebbels was sane. All of these guys were completely sane. And part of their sanity was they had a goal, and they didn't care about killing a lot of people to get to it. It is baffling to me that that's a question.
Perfect. He had a goal, and he didn't care about what it took to get to that. What would you call that?
You know what the
psychopath.
But that's not
a psycho or a sociopath.
You don't think
you're going to define things
somebody
based on your
Google
personal
the
definition.
what the
It's
DSM
not
four
based on
says that you
actual
have to have.
science. It's not based on psychiatry. Then I
It's
can't
not?
argue with that. You're literally making this up as you go. You are retroactively qualifying anyone who mass murdered anyone in any context as mentally ill.
I question
If
if you're being sincere.
You can't say that
RM. I question if you're being sincere.
your new definition for it. And it ignores the fact that there are evil people who do evil things.
Would you say that evil is normal?
So I'm still not
Yes, evil is normal.
Hold
Okay,
on,
go ahead.
Steve.
Go ahead.
You would say that evil is normal.
Evil is the baseline status of humanity. You've got to know that. You guys know enough about Christianity to understand that the very premise
That is
of
there is where your problem is. You see humanity
is
as at its core being evil, and I do not. I do not see a baseline of people
right.
being
And so
evil.
that's a difference. That's a difference. Sorry, you hate this word, worldview. You hate, but that's
I
right.
don't hate it. It's just I don't particularly use it.
That's
Anybody else
fine.
can.
You can use different
I
words.
deny the existence
Sure.
of worldviews.
So Kyle, what we're talking about is you're saying I don't have a Christian worldview, and I'm saying I do have a Christian worldview. Okay.
No, I'm saying that you do. No, I'm saying that you do. I'm saying that the Christian worldview teaches you that at their baseline, that you said, at their core, people are evil. I don't think that. I don't think that.
And that's what I'm saying. You don't think that because you don't share the precepts.
No. See, what your worldview allows you to do is to think that evil and somebody that can kill people at a mass amount is normal, whereas mine, I cannot fathom that for the life of me. So I'm pretty okay with being an atheist right now. I mean, I've got to tell you.
I hate to say this, and I do not mean to be disrespectful on this. I think, and I'm going to get shit for this, but I think that the position you're taking, RM, actually pushes away from Christianity. I think it actually has a negative backlash, because I would look at somebody like SJ.
I don't. I think it's right up there with it.
SJ can be contentious.
And let me challenge you on this.
Please
By
let me
what
finish my
standard
sentence.
do you say mass murder is
Please
wrong?
let me finish my consensus.
Stop. I can call mass murder wrong. Don't get pissy about this, but this is legitimate. I can look at scripture and I can say, thou shalt not kill, love your neighbor as yourself, pray for those who persecute you. I can point to objective moral standards and say, what these people do is wrong. You're an atheist. You reject that moral standard. You reject every objective moral standard.
Well, no, stop.
No.
First of all, I know atheists that accept objective morality, so that's complete bullshit.
All right,
and I want to say this because
is-
this needs to be said. SJ is a contentious person sometimes. I've seen what she writes, but all in all, when she gets in discussion, she's very articulate. We get along fantastic. She represents Christianity just fine, in my opinion. And I think when people look,
This is a road you will not win, RM. I promise you. If you want to go down it, I'm perfectly fine with it.
The effect of this.
I'm
And I had
perfectly
this
fine
discussion
with it.
with RJ just not too long ago. We talked about it. When people see this type of attitude, Hitler didn't have a problem. He didn't have any of the. I mean, look at the Dark Triad.
He was a monster. But I can say that it is a problem.
You know how people react to that when you say Hitler was mentally well? Because SJ, you don't think Hitler was mentally well, do you?
No, I think he's a psychopath.
There you go. I think that's psychopathy too, and Machiavellianism, and also the other one of the Dark Triad, narcissism. I think he was the perfect mix of half this stuff.
And let's just pop on one thing. You want to talk about pointing in scripture where you can get your morals from. What about these scriptures where it's okay to own slaves? It's okay to beat them within an inch of their life. It was okay to kill all of those people back in the Exodus times, that entire clan of people. That's where you get your morality from. I get mine from the fact that I don't want people to hurt me. There, in turn, I don't want to cause harm to them. I have empathy for people. It's not based in any supernatural need for a God. It's just based on the fact that
people, based on what you say, besides your opinion, your preference is to not hurt people. There are people whose preference is to hurt people. If you can't point to an objective tiebreaker, I can say no.
That's not.
Yeah, there's no such. I don't think that there is a such thing.
If there's not an objective tiebreaker, then what you're talking about has the same moral quality, has the same moral value as you saying that you like mustard and someone else likes ketchup. You don't like being hurt.
No,
so
stop. You're equivocating here. That's not what objective means.
Absolutely.
It's independent of mind when you're talking about the objective-subjective distinction. You're not talking about objective as saying, I'm looking at something with unbiased or anything like that. That's an equivocation of the word. There's a lot of atheists that I know, very educated ones, that actually have acceptance of objective morality. You could be an atheist and accept objective morality. You can be a theist
From where? Based on what?
That's a grounding problem. The grounding problem is different from accepting objective morality. You could be
how many wars, how many wars, how many bloodbaths, how many killings have been the result of that morality that's in the book?
A fraction, historically, a fraction of only the killings that were done by atheists in the 20th century.
In the name of atheism?
Oh yeah, in the name of atheism.
I have never. Hey, I'm going to kill you if you don't believe in a God. Or actually, if you God doesn't exist.
Stalin, Pol Pot. I mean, there were definitely some who did things in the name of getting rid of religion. And
they were atheists. Yeah, but first of all, they were not atheists who did things in the name of religion.
No one's ever.
You guys have that You guys have that title. Y'all win on that reward. Y'all win on the whole.
Let me go back to something.
Kyle, and it's historically incorrect.
Go ahead.
Let me go back to something. Kyle and both mentioned this, and Kyle mentioned the whole thing with the Old Testament and some of the issues in the Old Testament. Our example as Christians is really to follow Jesus. And so if you look at Jesus, he said those who live by the sword die by the sword. He was all about peace. He was known as the Prince of Peace. So really,
he also said, I come not to bring peace, but to bring the sword.
Well, that's actually the word of God. That the sword in that context refers to the word of God.
That's how you would interpret it. I'm just saying other people interpret it differently. He says one thing one place and then one thing in another. I mean, you can't base something solid in this is just my opinion, but you just can't base it. Leads to this the confusion that somebody can kill all of these people and still somehow be normal. But yet I'm going to get told that I don't have a basis for my morality. I don't not tonight. Not tonight.
So I want to ask Shannon, because Shannon's our go-to person for this. So because she's been summoned, it's like okay. So let's ask Shannon in the live chat. Do you think that a person who goes in and kills a bunch of kids in school, shoots them all up, do you think they're mentally well or can be mentally well? My position is if you go in and you start killing children, you're de facto not mentally well. Now, whatever your psychopathy is, that's for a professional. But I don't have to be a professional to go, that person is not mentally well. So I want to get her position on that because she has experience in it.
RM, I can't believe that's the hill you're going to die on, man.
Well, here's the thing. We don't even have to talk about it anymore. What I'm saying, and again, this is not just from a Second Amendment supporter. This is from a medical professional. There are real psychiatric diagnoses with real criteria. What you're talking about is a retroactive qualification. It's a retroactive, and if you want to do it, fine. But the point is, from a pragmatic standpoint, you're never going to screen anybody. And again, I'm not saying they're normal. They're monstrous and evil, and something broke inside them. It's not necessarily their mental capacity, but let's call all of them mentally ill. How are you going to screen for that? The way you're defining
but that's a diagnosis. But that's different.
The way you're defining it, you can't do it until it's already happened. So how are we going to let's?
Well, I think you could pre-screen for it, but we're talking. You said though, a person who does this can still be considered mentally well. Shannon says no, clearly not. And I'm like, I still don't understand.
Clearly not. There's been studies. Again, I deal with data. I'm in an evidence-based profession. You guys are making up new qualifications. When you actually talk about DSM correlating with mass shootings, you get a 22% correlation with mental illness and mass shootings. If you want to make up your own mentally ill, that's fine. That's your prerogative. You can't screen for it because your condition for it happens after the fact. We already committed.
I'm as confused as I was last night at the flat Earth.
I really want to get Arm on.
Super easy.
Arm, you're saying that a person who goes in and commits these atrocities by killing kids.
Yes, he said this 9 times. Yes.
Yeah, there's nothing else to talk about. Let's talk about.
You're saying that you were not willing to say that person by de facto is not mentally well, and then you can send them for screening and determine what their issue is. But I would think that any rational human being would look at that and go,
not all these people die. They have done screening. That's where the data comes from. And these people have been looked at, and they've not been found to be mentally ill. 22% of them, which is slightly higher than the general population.
Okay.
This has all been done. You guys can argue against quantified data.
We're not going to get anywhere on this, so let's.
And again, it's a good point because we're not stopping.
Let's end it here on that. I think. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where to go.
I'll tell you.
So this is what I would suggest, because again, this is a problem that we all want to solve. Let's think hard about what we can do to realistically harden these targets that keep getting hit, which is specifically schools. I think that is going to be the area of discussion that people are going to agree on most. Whether that's arming teachers fraught with problems, sure, but I think it's possible. Whether it's putting armed guards, which leads to let's make sure the guards who are there, the police officers who are armed and there, do their job and address the shooter as it's happening, which is kind of the big failing of Parkland.
Step up the mental health aspect in America.
Yes, I think that's legitimate. I think that's totally
pay
legitimate.
more attention to kids. I think they might be a little bit more willing to. You might be able to see the cracks. I think nowadays everything is so screens in front of your face, and people don't sit around and eat around the table like they used to. You're disconnected. Yeah. So I think trying to get back to a point where everybody seems a little bit more, where you know what's going on in somebody else's life, your friends, family, maybe you can see the cracks. A lot of times I see kids on TV after these things, and they are able to think back and say, well, I guess I should have seen this come. There are things that they can look back and see in hindsight, but they don't take the time to do that and be proactive,
Sure.
with it. I think that you have to. I don't know how to handle the arming teachers at school. I really don't. I think that's you don't really win either way you go there. But I think if we start to focus on what's really broken in some of these people and make them feel like they matter. I think a lot of times.
You mentioned bullying.
Yeah, if you took the time to let people know that they matter,
Sure.
that goes a long way.
Well, okay. So we all agree that we think that, and whether you're atheist, Christian, Buddhist, whatever, human life has value. And when it comes to these mass shootings, protecting the children is of a paramount importance. As a father, especially, I don't want my daughter to go to school and get shot up. I mean, so I think that has to be the primary consideration. And I'm sorry, at this point, if you have to sacrifice some things like you can't own an AR-15, I'm okay with that. I've gotten to that point, and I tell you, I moved on this position, dude. I used to be a lot more like you, free guns and stuff like that. Over the years, I have moved into this position where, you know what, fuck it. Now kids are dying, and I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my rights
like
for
I
the
said,
protection of our children.
20 times more kids have died by handguns.
You throw that out there like it's a justifiable defeater.
No,
and people are listening to that going, "Are you kidding me?"
Too. If you care about the issue, you should be talking about that as well.
Hold on. Would it help? Would it help if it saved one kid? Would it be worth trading in your right to have an assault rifle if it saved one kid?
Well, one of the reasons that I own an assault rifle is because I have kids. We haven't gotten into that, but
an assault rifle to protect.
But I mean, are you expecting an army to come piling in? Like, what would an assault rifle do that a handgun won't do?
Wait, stop. Yes, absolutely. I'm not expecting it, but the whole purpose of the Second Amendment is to make sure it doesn't happen.
But is your paranoia of the government?
It's not paranoia at all.
Just hold on. Is that worth the 23 kids that died at Sandy Hook? Because you feel better that the government won't come in.
You just mentioned the government.
I'm sorry. I don't think that's worth it.
I got to ask because it's on the line. Are you a sovereign citizen, if I may ask?
I don't even know. I'm not familiar with the term.
Okay, so, if you don't know what it is, that's fine. If you ever want to have some funny, if you ever want to like laugh, go to YouTube and watch sovereign citizen videos.
By the way, guys, let Steve know your questions. We're gonna kind of wind down just for a little bit, but if you have any questions, shoot them over to Steve in the live chat, and he can.
What you got for us?
Thanks. I don't have too much time left, guys, so I have to. Yeah. It's kind of late on my post.
I do want Ariam. I do want you to come back to have a discussion with Who were we talking about earlier? My brain is so
Psy.
frazzled right.
Psy.
Yeah.
Psy.
Yeah. Psy.
And by the way,
let me write that down so.
before I forget, when we go off air, can you guys, or at least RM, can you stick around for a minute after we go off air?
Am I in trouble?
No.
Oh yeah, you're in
Big
trouble.
time.
You bad boy, you. No.
Are there any questions from the people in the live chat? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
And thank you, Gage. By the way, yes, we have Streamlabs. We haven't gotten our super chat yet. YouTube has been awfully slow. So if you wanted to donate to the Streamlabs, we do appreciate it immensely.
Although I emailed them today, so hopefully we'll get an answer on that.
Good.
Shortly. Yeah. I'm proactive.
I do think, when we do talk about testing people and possibilities for testing people before they obtain guns, I do think you could test people for psychopathy and you could test them for sociopathy. And I think if people test positive for either of those, I don't think that they're the best people to have guns.
Not to make it an argument, but I think if you're on any kind of mind-altering drugs, you shouldn't have them either.
Oh, I know. I think everybody with mind-altering drugs should have weapons, but
So in Florida in particular, those are good ideas. They already exist. You
how about
can't
this?
you can't get a gun in Florida
If you're a psychopath?
User.
Yeah.
You
Good.
can't
That's Florida. I mean, Florida's
you're-
crazy anyway, right? I mean,
We have
kinda
a
have
question.
to have that in
question.
Florida.
Jake says,
We have
could
some
you,
crazies here.
you do.
no
Could you
offense,
please
that's-
Could you please ask Huffman if he supports universal background checks and a 30-day waiting period?
not a 30-day waiting period.
Why not? I'm curious.
Because why? What are you looking for? What's your purpose?
A cool
All right, I
off
feel like
period.
you got all the bad answers book, and you're just going with that. Like,
That's a bad answer. Well, I mean, I think there's something to be said by 30-day cooling off period. I mean, a lot of things are spur of the moment, and people go, "Oh, I had to fight this person. I want to go get a handgun." I don't know how effective it is. I don't know what the efficacy of a 30-day is. I have never looked into those statistics. Maybe somebody could do that, but you just don't think it makes a difference. But you don't. What do you think?
Show me something that it would. A lot of the solutions are kind of quote unquote, right? Because a lot of the things that have been suggested by you guys are already being done. A lot of the other things suggested.
I think they're very sporadic, though, and I don't think they're implemented exceptionally well. I
Not
think that's
nationwide.
So I think that's an excellent point. If you're going to focus on something, first familiarize yourself with what's already being done, and second, hold your elected officials and especially your law enforcement personnel on a local level and a national level too,
The
responsible.
NRA is doing that for us, RM. The NRA is already doing that for us. I think they've got it good. I don't think there's anything we can do for them that the NRA is not already doing.
Here's an interesting question, and it's actually to me, but I think it says, Steve, I don't understand why you disagreed with him on there being a difference between evil and mental illness. I don't think they're even remotely the same thing. Evil is a whole different concept. Evil is a metaphysical concept. Mental illness is something that we actually can see. They can do diagnosis on it. They can treat. Evil is just a concept.
Evil is
That's all
subjective.
And evil may not even exist. Who knows? I mean, I'm leaning toward error theory. So I'm like some of these concepts. I don't think they're even could be in a proposition. What does it mean to be evil? If I say, hey, stealing is evil, what does that really mean? I don't know if that you could even assign a truth value to that. And so I am kind of leaning toward Mackey's error theory on that as a more anti-realist. But
Once again, he's agnostic, ladies and gentlemen. Shocker.
I know, dude, that's the best place to be. You get to get cookies from both sides.
Our cookies have weed.
Yeah, agnostics get cookies. We do. We get a lot. Macadamian. We get, just love cookies.
Well, let's kind of, if there's any more, Steve, let's get. I know SJ's got.
I'm looking, but I just thought that was weird because I don't see a correlation between mental illness and evil.
I don't want
very
to.
different
I
concepts.
don't want to.
We got.
Actually, Steve, let me see. I see Artemis is asking something
Okay, yeah,
about
Artemis, yeah.
sociopathy and keeping people out of the clergy. I do think that people who are sociopaths should not be in the clergy. I will say that.
No, that's disqualifying. I'm on board.
Yeah.
I'm on board with that.
Let's see. They're kind of just talking about each other, so I don't
Cool,
see
well-
the questions.
You had your shot. So we're gonna. But yeah, it was just as heated as I thought it would get. You can't I don't think have a rational, I guess, or a monotoned voice during these kind of debates.
Well, we all can group hug and love each other now.
Yes.
Well,
I don't.
Except for Frankie, I don't want to hug Frankie.
Just this is an emotional issue, right?
Sure.
You can't. This is not an issue where you just look at the straight up. Let's look at the CDC and FBI data and create policy. There is a huge emotional component to this. But again, I think there's some common ground where we can at least all get together and see what we can optimize and what we can maybe do better. Because again, nobody wants this stuff to happen. This isn't like, hey, flat Earth, you're wrong, buddy.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I could say the same thing. Young Earth, you're wrong, right?
Hey,
I'm so against.
I have one question before we go.
We have one more question from the live chat. Can we do it real quick?
I have one question before I make my mind up on you, RM. What did you think of the 2016 election?
Oh man. So I said I did anagrams, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just give you a Donald Trump anagram?
Oh yeah, please.
This is hot fire.
And while you're doing that, somebody had to ask a good question. What do you think of the way Japan does their mental illness assessment?
I don't know. I wouldn't know enough about it. I'm not familiar with Japan's screening. But
I know they have one, but I'm not quite sure.
Google it.
Google food, baby.
Google, you speak of. Okay, these are when Donald Trump was when he was in the primaries. These are all anagrams. We're familiar with anagrams.
Yeah.
Right. So Donald Trump, President of the United States of America, can be rearranged into, and you can take your pick. A foul-tempered, distressed, don't nominate pathetic fraud. The loudest candidate, fat inept morons, a dumpster fire. Mutton-headed infant, a complete disaster. Fire POS turd.
Behold redemption, ladies and gentlemen.
Wait, hold on, wait. See truth of fantastic man, determined, adored populist.
Okay, we're okay now. I can. That's redemption right there.
That's you know what's funny? That's Kyle's litmus test. As long as you're not a Trump fan, he don't give a shit what the hell you believe.
That is
2016 was.
Yeah, it is. I know. How funny.
That is the test.
Yes,
Should have been Bernie. That's all I'm saying. I will leave it on this. Should have been Bernie.
Should have been Bernie. That's the model for Kyle the entire year.
2016 was the ultimate argument for decreasing the power of the office of the President of the United States. That's all I'll say about that. And I mean,
and we wound up with the hydrogenated Cheeto as Commander-in-Chief. So we ended on a positive note, which is good. So thank you, Trump. This is the one thing that you've done that is probably good.
Everybody together. From every walk of life. Nobody likes Trump. Okay, great.
Join us tomorrow, guys, at 8 o'clock, where we will be roasting, no offense, RM, we will be roasting Kent Hovind.
You have Kent Hovind on tomorrow?
And don't, I'm telling you, I'm not going to give anything away, but the videos people have done are awesome.
It's like the Friars Club. We're doing like the Friars Club roast of Kent Hovind. He stood us up because he was supposed to have a sequel with us. And he backed out of that, so we figured, we already set the day aside, might as well do something with him. So he'll be here in spirit, but not like willy.
Well, but somebody had asked us, Kyle, and I think we need to get this on air. They had asked us, because the way we do our dialectics, and because we are very fair, and because of the entire great debate community, we always have this thing that if we talk about somebody, they should be able to, interact with us on those kind of things.
Fair. Have they not read the comment section?
Should we invite Kent to it?
These hosts are biased.
Yes, Kent can come.
I agree with you. I will send it.
That would be a dream come true, Kent.
I will send it to them tomorrow morning. I will most certainly invite them, because I think it's disrespectful not to. I mean, they're going out of way to roast.
If you're out there, I know that you're getting ready to open up Dinosaur Adventureland, and we're very excited. I even offered that if you came back and we weren't fair to you the second time, that me and Steve would go and volunteer a weekend down at Dinosaur Adventureland.
He did do that.
But that wasn't good enough. Now, I know this is awkward because we have this kind of roast thing planned tomorrow, and you're probably not going to like it. But you are cordially invited. In fact, we would be so happy if you would join us here tomorrow, Friday the 13th at 8 o'clock. I think nothing would be better than you with us here. So
You know what?
Crayon
I bought
and
double
a
IPA
tea.
just for the event. Double IPA, 13% for tomorrow night.
Good.
It's gonna be
All right.
fun.
RM and SJ, two people going by their initials tonight.
It's an author thing. That's what they do. I don't know what to say.
Do you have any last words before
My
we
initials are S and
close out?
M. So I didn't really want to go with that.
Any last words before we close out? Empty the chamber. Now's your chance.
I'll just say thank you for having us on and being able to voice our opinions. And I think that we did come to some agreements on certain items. So
Trump mainly the one. I don't want to forget that. We did agree on Trump, so that's a win. RM, you get the last word.
Yeah, I agree with SJ. I mean, thanks for having me on. I guess my view was not shared by other people too much, but
What makes you
it's a
say
hard
that?
it's a hard situation. I think what you have to do to solve it or to get anywhere towards solving it, which again, you're never, whether it's mental illness or it's evil, it's never going to be a problem that's going to go away. But if you're going to mitigate it to the greatest extent that we can mitigate it, we can do a better job doing that. And I think it starts with hardening targets that are being targeted in particular schools, because that's where kids are, and then doing a better job with things like screening. Make sure you're actually following up, and law enforcement has to do their job because they've fallen down a couple of significant times.
I think everybody will agree with you on those things, and it just goes to show that look, we may not, the five of us here, and people can't see there's somebody else in here. We may not be able to change anything, but I think the discussions are valid. I think the discussions are needed, and I think they need to be fostered all over the place. And people need to have this discussion more because I think gun control is one of the more critical things that has real world consequences. I think it's even greater real world consequences if somebody believes in God or not. Now I understand religion has real world consequences, but the belief is just a belief. But guns affect people, and when it starts affecting kids, that's when I jump in and go, yeah, something needs to be done.
And if worse comes to worse, everyone, go get yourself a grenade launcher.
RPGs.
jeez.
Good night, everybody.
Good
We'll see you
night.
tomorrow
Good
at 8
night.
o'clock.
All right, thanks, y'all.